Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the iWorkinSport live interview. This is the show where we talk to accomplished sport business professionals who come here to share their knowledge, experience, tips, and advice in order to help you succeed in your career. If we're just meeting, my name is João Frigerio. I'm the founder of iWorkinSport, and I want to thank you for being here with us today. I always ask you, is this your first time? Well, if this is your first time, don't know, I always ask you that, but people who's coming back know that. So I would like to know if this is your first time or if you're coming back. And obviously, I would also like if you could write in the comments where you're watching this from. That would be great. We normally have a very international crowd, people from different continents watching us. So that would be very nice to know. Also, if you're watching the replay, leave that in the comment as well. It's always good to know where you're watching from. Now, if you don't know, iWorkinSport, we're a platform to help you accelerate your career in sports. We do that in a few ways, but primarily through our events. So if you want to work in sport or already are working sport, we're here to you either way. So about the events, I just told you, we actually have two of them coming up. One is the iWorkinSport Job Fair. That is coming up in just over a week. So a week tomorrow on Friday, we're taking some of the best sports organizations. They will be recruiting, meeting with you in person in Lausanne at the Swiss Tech Convention Center. And then a week after that, if you're actually looking for a program, maybe to study sports management, you can attend that. That one is for free. It's online. It's called the Educational Virtual Expo. Check that out. That could be quite helpful to you. Now, taking that out of the way, let me introduce you my guest. Today, I'm going to talk to Charlie Marsall. He is the Chief Executive Officer at the European Club Association, also known as ECA. Well, in this interview, we'll know exactly what that means, right? What does the ECA do? What he does at ECA? And ultimately, how was his professional path that took him to the position that he's in today? And interestingly, the timing couldn't have been better, since there were some important decisions about European club football taken this week. So let's take the opportunity to learn what those decisions mean too, right? So I don't want to take too long with this introduction. So let me invite Charlie to join me right after this. Hi, Charlie. Let me bring you in. There you are. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good, thanks, João. How are you doing?
Very well, too. I can see by the banner that you are at the office in Nyon.
Correct. Well spotted. Well spotted. Yeah, been on the road a bit recently, but back in Nyon today.
Yeah, you just got back from Spain, right?
Spain via Vienna.
Spain via Vienna. That's great. Charlie, great to have you here. I hope that will be interesting for you. I'm sure that will be very interesting for me, for people that are watching us. By the way, just to give you a sense of who's already, saying hi. We have Renata here on YouTube saying it's not her first time, and she's in Lausanne. We have Ella Jones in Geneva on LinkedIn. Sebastian Bottari also in Geneva. Oh, Deep. I hope I didn't kill your name. So, in watching in Scotland. David Fowler, also in Scotland, watching it from Scotland, watching at Gatwick Airport. Hi, David. David was one of our guests here. Good to see you, man. Alexander Kupus in Ukraine. Alexander, we're really hoping that things, get better there soon. Be strong, my friend. who else is here? There's someone from Malaysia who I can see in the name. I'll check that on LinkedIn later. So in Spain as well, Jesus. Great. So you see, we have people in Malaysia, in Geneva, in Gatwick, in Spain, from all over. There will be more people joining us, Charlie. Now, let me start. I always start, as I said, there is probably some current topics that we can talk about as well. But I always start, since this is a career-focused program. So let's start talking about your career. Maybe if you can give us a summary. I know that you haven't been always working in sports, or been in sport and from outside. So maybe let us know what you studied and what took you to where you are at the moment.
Sure. Yeah. No. And look, thanks for the introduction to come on the show. I really like what you do. I like this kind of more informal atmosphere that you create, where actually I do think it's important for people to have these kind of conversations and to learn about people's career paths and, you know, what took them where by accident or by design. I've got a fair bit of both of those things in my story. And it's kind of, they're not the conversations that we usually have with each other in the professional environment. So I've enjoyed watching your sessions before with others, and hopefully I can bring a few interesting things to the table as well, and not all about the decisions, as you said, that were made this week. But okay, how did I even get myself into a position where I had the privilege to be involved in these decisions, I guess, is the starting question. I've always worked in and around sport, and maybe a little bit more broadly in and around the media and entertainment industries. Like many people who work in these sectors, I'm a kind of failed musician come sportsman. Actually, not really sportsman. I played a lot of football when I was a kid, but kind of music was my thing. And when I realized
what kind of music?
Oh, that's a subject for a different day. But I was a guitar player all through my teens and into my early 20s. So I was sort of I was convinced that I would just follow that path, which is also in my family.
All right.
But unfortunately, it became clear to me, probably in my late teens, that it wasn't something that was the best idea. I didn't quite have that unique thing you need, which is talent, or enough of it. But I made the decision then that I wanted to at least always work in and around the creative industries. If I couldn't actually be a creative, then I wanted to work, within the business of creativity, entertainment. Before that, though, I did at university. I studied Latin and Greek. So those are my kind of academic subjects: Latin, Greek, philosophy, and ancient history. So these are not the typical things that you see on a sports professional CV. Although there are some of us around.
We see a lot of lawyers.
If you dig very carefully, you will find other classicists here and there. I don't know whether any of them are on the live stream at the moment, but I could point to a few up the road here and a couple up in Zurich and maybe around the other place anyway. So one day I'll get together a tiny little group of classicists within the sport industry, and we'll sit around reading Virgil or Plato or something like that.
Cool.
I doubt there'll be very many interested in that. Anyway, so after university, though, the thing I decided that I needed, because I'd had quite an academic time at university rather than a vocational one, was some proper business training. So I wanted to go into an environment which would give me some of the business skills and the tools to work in business that I hadn't got at university, and that, quite frankly, I didn't see within the music and the sports industries. So I went into management consultancy. I decided it was, I literally, it was a very calculated process. I kind of looked at what is the typical trajectory of someone in their early 20s, the first 2 to 3 years of their career, in banking, in consultancy, in law, and which one of those did I think would give me the most leverage, the most education from a business skills point of view, and the most leverage to go off and actually do whatever it was I decided that I wanted to do in my career. And I definitely hadn't made the decision when I was 22 that I wanted to be a career management consultant. I just felt that it was the right environment to be in to get the training, and it delivered on that massively. So it was a very, very smart thing. Probably one of the smartest things I've done. I went to a big blue chip consultancy called LEK, which was a spin-off of Bain back in the 80s, I think, based in London. I only stayed there for a year because it was a generalist consultancy. I ended up working in airport retail and the steel industry, and quite a random collection of industry. But I always wanted to work in sports and media, and that particular firm, although it did some great work for the likes of Disney, I wasn't getting access to those projects that I wanted. And there was a little consultancy formed in London by a couple of people, ex-Booz Allen and ex-McKinsey, which was called Spectrum, which many people working in sport will know. It's not around anymore, but this was around about 2000, the year 2000. And I joined Spectrum with about 55 other consultants, I think, around 7 countries in the world. We were small and we were just focused on telecoms and media, the sort of digital convergence space. And within the media practice at Spectrum, I very quickly started working on sports projects and very quickly started working on football. And so for about 6 years, my main client at Spectrum was the Premier League. And that was my first kind of grounding in football. As a consultant, I did a lot of work on the commercial side, designing rights packages, running sales processes for rights packages, looking at the birth of online and the birth of digital media and what that was doing to traditional, as we used to call them, rights, and all of that kind of really interesting period of time around about 2000 to 2006, 2007, when sports rights and football rights were being completely redefined and sold in different ways.
I remember that time.
Yeah.
I do. I actually wrote a report for SportCal at the time exactly about that, about mobile media rights, how everything was different. We didn't have the smartphones, and people would actually buy. So the phone companies would actually buy rights, just like broadcasters just show clips. Things changed a lot since then, but yeah.
Funny you should say that, because when I left Spectrum in 2006, 2007, I went to 3, the telecoms company.
They were the biggest investors in it, yeah.
Because whilst working with the Premier League, I had been involved in probably the first major acquisition of mobile video rights in top tier sports, which was Hutchison's acquisition of Premier League highlights in around about 2003, I think. I'm maybe getting that wrong, but they spent at the time a lot of money on mobile video rights for the Premier League, actually without much of a platform to put them on. They hadn't rolled out the business. They hadn't rolled out the handsets. They hadn't rolled out even the sort of base stations, which were transmitting all the wonderful, high-speed 3G data capacity. But nevertheless, it was seen as a big strategic move, as you say, to buy premium rights and to use those to launch that business. So I developed some good relationships there, and I ended up then leaving consultancy because I wanted to spend some time in industry. And I went to Hutch. I went to 3 in the UK and worked in the strategy team. So I ran the strategy team at 3 in the UK for a while, focused on the media and kind of content side of what they were doing.
Wow. And how did you actually get to the ECA then?
Yeah, so from Hutch, from 3 to the ECA, there's a few steps. I left 3 to exercise some sort of entrepreneurial ghosts. I wanted to do my own thing a little bit for a period of time, a mixture of consulting. I always missed music, so I went back and did some consulting with some music artists and music managers, again looking at rights and how rights were sort of moving from labels to artists and how they were kind of being restructured as digital was taking more of a hold in the distribution and consumption space. So I did that for a little bit. I worked in the finance sector for a bit, looking at the financing of media and content. So I worked at a company called Ingenious, which was doing lots of structured financing around media, sports, music, gaming projects. Then I spent some time at Accenture. So I'm getting there. It's been quite varied, but there's always been logic. I decided
that's great. There's already comments about your interesting path here. That's I'm going to read to you in a second.
I'll get to ECA in a minute. But what I wanted to do, because I have had the privilege of having quite a diverse career, I did want to share it with people because I think there are lots of routes to finding, to finding your way to somewhere eventually. And if you think along the way about what's missing from your toolkit, like what's missing from your armory, and if you try and address that as a next step in your career, it's always been my experience that, it's made every decision a good decision. So this is about 2011 I'm at now, right? So I'd looked at entrepreneurial stuff, I'd looked at strategy stuff within a corporate, I'd looked at the funding and the financing side of media and content, and I decided that what I was lacking was a big sort of operational role. I hadn't done ops. I hadn't worked for a big kind of multinational and seen how things work within that kind of environment. I'd always worked within small environments. Even Three was a very, very small telco compared to a Vodafone or an O2. So I went to Accenture, and I had a global role at Accenture. Again, unsurprisingly, in the media and entertainment space. So I was doing work with the likes of broadcasters, publishers, music labels, and sports companies. And when I was at Accenture, one of the things I did was start to try to pull together a global sports proposition within Accenture. Not easy within a very big multinational with revenue streams coming in from enormous industries like oil and gas and product and automotive, and sports is a tiny sector. I often give this speech in a separate context, like the whole of the revenues of the football industry, which is pretty much certainly the biggest subsector of the sports industry. If you put everything together in football, rights, media rights, sponsorship rights, merchandising, events, ticketing, put all of the revenue together, probably the football industry is about the same size as a kind of relatively large car company.
Exactly.
I imagine it's probably about the same size as VW. Okay,
Yeah,
VW is a big company, but we're talking about the whole of football. So it still remains a reasonably small sector. So when you work in a big company like Accenture, you're always sort of competing against those bigger sources of revenue. So you've always got to be finding a niche if you're working in sport or working in music, and if you want to stay ahead. So I did that for a bit. Then there's one more hop before I get back to ECA. So after I actually got headhunted from Accenture to go into a business that many people here probably would have heard of, which is called Supponor. And Supernor was the pioneer really, in a field which is becoming increasingly common now, which is the replacement of billboard advertising, the live and digital replacement of billboard advertising within sports broadcasting.
Yeah.
And so it's a fascinating area, niche but fascinating, because as sport has become much more of a global phenomenon, watched all around the world, we were still stuck with the advertising and the sponsorship within those live broadcasts only being one thing, what was on the boards in the ground at any one time. So the smart folks who set up Supernor figured that if we could find a way of targeting that advertising by replacing it in the digital arena and making it look real and authentic, then we could send out different versions of the same live feed to different audiences around the world and deliver them more relevant pitch side advertising. It's hugely complicated technology for a very simple and powerful commercial application. And I went into that business because it was a technology in the lab. It was a product was in the lab, and it was a business that needed to be built to actually get the product out of the lab and put it into the market. And I figured then, looking back on my career to date, taking on board the financing side, because it was a venture-backed business, the technology side and the operational side that I learned at Accenture, the sports side that I'd done previously, for me, that all kind of came together. And that was a fascinating 5-year project that I ended up doing there, bringing that product out of the lab and putting it into, European football, NBA, NHL, all these kind of global sports. And so that was me getting back into sport after my 10 years diversification. And then when the ECA came along in 2018, it was something I could not say no to. It was very, very obvious, how important ECA was and is. and it was, it was a very, very quick decision that I was lucky enough to be able to make, having gone through a process. And I think I doubt I'll be quite as diverse in the future. I feel like I've bookended, my career with the Premier League up front and ECA now. I've probably still got a few more years ahead of me, sadly, but I'm very kind of happy and content now, and it's an unbelievable challenge and exciting opportunity, and it delivers on a daily basis. So that's the full picture.
No, that's great, and it's very nice to see such a diverse background. Obviously, I've talked to people here that actually started, working with sports because they volunteered at the Olympic Games, when they were early 20s, and then they started from there and kind of stuck there doing that kind of job or in that kind of world for a long time. And it's super interesting to see how you went from one place to the other and actually put together, what they call transferable skills, right? It's funny. Once we had one case at our job there when a guy was quickly rejected for the application just because he was coming from a job that had nothing to do, or the job title was very different from what he was applying for. But once he actually met the recruiter there, he could say, listen, I understand why you think that. I have a very kind of unusual background, but if you give me 5 minutes to show you how those skills I think are very transferable for what you're looking for. And he ended up getting the job. So I think, that's very encouraging to people that are watching, because that's a lot of questions that I get is exactly about that. I was doing something else. Can I go and still sort of work in sport? And yeah, so I think you're the living proof that you can. Renata actually is commenting here that it's funny that you have that different background, how that diverse background gets a job to manage high position in sport, but a lot of the Swiss HR seem to accept only square CVs.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a really
how was that
point.
process then for you? Did you actually sort of apply? Did they find you? And because that's an interesting point, because I don't know, I would imagine that a lot of people that have been working in sport for maybe 20 years or so could be, interested in that kind of position as well. So what do you think that's made you get that job?
I think it was that, and it's a little bit to Renata's question, employers, particularly in sports, are just not open-minded and creative enough to really understand what it is that makes a hire a good hire, and what to look for in a recruitment process. And I think the process I went through, which was a recruitment process run by an executive search firm, who I won't name, I think probably the right thing to do, though you could find out if you dug around. But they were very, very good at asking slightly divergent questions of this organization to find a different kind of a profile. Because I think you're right. I think if you put a job ad up for, as I came into the ECA, the managing director of ECA, you probably don't find me. I don't get caught by the LinkedIn algorithms, and I think that the traditional job description wouldn't have found me. But the reason I got the call was the recruitment firm did what all good recruitment firms do, and they reach out to their networks, and you get an email, and or you get a LinkedIn buzz, and they say, I've got an opportunity, maybe you know someone, that one, where it could either be, I want to talk to you because I want to ask you if you want to be in the process. And if you say no, then I'll ask you if you know anyone. And I had a very, very good friend, someone who was instrumental in the business that I mentioned earlier called Spectrum, and one of the biggest mentors in my career, a guy by the name of William Field, who is sadly no longer with us. But William got a call from the firm who was looking at the ECA job, and it wasn't for him. He would have been an unbelievable, far better than me choice for the ECA. But the conversation went as it normally goes with recruitment firms, and they said to William, "Do you know anyone?" And he mentioned me, and it went from there. And I think that the reason I ultimately did get it was because I approached this role as a kind of consulting type of challenge. The ECA, to lead on, I suppose, a little bit to one of your other questions in the call, what is the ECA? The ECA is it's not a governing body. It's not a competition organizer. It's not a big operational company. When I got here, we were 12 people. I think about 12 people. We're just about 23, 24 now. And growing, but we're never going to be a UEFA in terms of size or a FIFA. We're never even going to be a medium-sized football club in terms of our size. But what we are is a kind of combination between a sort of strategy company, because we have to act very strategically on behalf of all of our members when it comes to ensuring their interests are represented well within the European sort of football governance framework. We have to think really carefully about, you know, who are the stakeholders we engage with? How do we engage with them? How can we best partner with the stakeholders to represent our member clubs' interests? How can we get all of the member clubs together and try and divine some kind of collective view when we know in reality they all think differently individually? It's really a kind of a strategic challenge, a kind of a strategic consulting challenge. It's not really an operational one, although there is an operational element to it in terms of growing this business. And that's actually where the future of this company goes once we're through the whole the whole strategic side. So long and short of it is, I think that ultimately it was my strategic background rather than my football background actually that got me in here. Although having the football background was obviously meant I could talk the language.
No, that's great. Let's continue on that path. What you're talking about. You explain concepts of the ECA, but maybe institutionally, let's explain a bit better. There were some questions already on the chat. How is it formed? It's an association format. Who are the members? How the structure works, and maybe then the relationship that you have with other governing bodies in football.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the simplest way to think about ECA is it is the voice of the clubs across all of the European countries who participate or regularly participate in the European competitions. That's the easiest. So we often describe ourselves as the heart of football, because we passionately believe that the clubs are at the core of football. We know that, I mean, they're not the only thing that makes up football. It's not that kind of a message, but they are the kind of engine of the competitions, of the leagues, of the players, of all the stadiums, and they're the engine of ultimately what fans care about, which is really why we're all here. And what they are also, because of all of that I've just said, they're also a very fragmented bunch. They have to be. You can't have an interesting football landscape without all the clubs being different and diverse and of all shapes and sizes across all different countries and all different leagues. So bringing this kind of fragmentation together into one place and one voice, and making sure therefore that they're listened to as a set of stakeholders, that they have a kind of a place within the decision making that surrounds the key aspects of European football, be that about competitions or the calendar or the regulatory side of football or the commercial side of football, all of these things which basically make up football. We're the ones that sit at the table and represent at least those clubs, the leading clubs of Europe, the ones who regularly play in Europe. So that's kind of who we are. We were born out of an early attempt to do that, to a club representation, which was called the G14. I'm guessing by the profile of your audience that people are probably too young to remember the G14. But the G14 was a collection of the top 14, as they were, clubs in Europe when the Champions League was in its infancy.
That's a deceiving name, because when they became ECA, were more than 14.
Well, this is it. Well, I think they became 18 not too long after, but they kept the name as G14. But it ended up, I think, being that they were it was too small a group. Even though they were the real top clubs, it was still too small a group to be genuinely representative. So they gave way to something that UEFA ran for a while called the European Club Forum, the ECF. I don't think it was around for too long, before my time, but 2008, something like that, 2007, 2008, which was, again, all the clubs playing in the competitions, but a forum for them to come and actually engage with, UEFA in particular around the European competitions. But I think that was then sort of almost too broad. You went from one extreme with the G4 scene to the other extreme with the European Club Forum. And then two gentlemen got together in about 2008, helped by a lot of other people in sport, but two in particular, which was the then president of UEFA, Michel Platini, and the person who became ECA's first chairman, which was Karl-Heinz Rummenigge. They got together and they had a personal relationship. They were both, we all know who they are, right? They're both two of the most famous and awesome players to ever have played the game. And they kind of, their discussions, I think at the time, led to the creation of ECA. So ECA then became a more representative body of clubs. We started with, I don't know the exact number, but 120, 130 clubs, probably reflecting the size of the competitions back then. And we started to form, a more organized, representative body, which engaged with UEFA and then FIFA as well when it came to global regulatory matters in particular, on behalf of the clubs. And then we started to advance the kind of clubs, if you like, influence and positions within the key decisions that were being made around all of those things I mentioned earlier, from competitions to income to distribution to the rules surrounding the release of players from clubs to national teams, which is a huge part of what we care about and what we do. Yeah. And then we're now 246 members as of today. We run in, from a governance perspective, we go in 4-year cycles, a little bit like UEFA does or FIFA does. So we have a new set of members every 4 years. There are about 246, exactly 246 now. They're structured into what we call subdivisions, 4 subdivisions. Each one kind of reflects the broad sort of the broad size and scope of the clubs in each subdivision. It's a way of grouping them so that they can have relevant interests within a sort of subsection of ECA. Right. But actually, since the Super League, which you may ask about in a second, because it was quite a seismic event in the history of the ECA, since a certain section of those member clubs did what they did last April, and I think everybody knows the story. Now we've got a new chairman, Nasser Al-Khalifi from PSG, a new board, not a brand new board, but a new sort of set of leadership. One of the things that's been very important to them since the Super League is to actually kind of get rid of these divisions that ultimately lead a little bit to cliquey decision making. So it's been a much more open and inclusive place for the last 18 months, and the results of that are beginning to be seen, and I think quite an interesting way. There's a lot more compromise having to go on, but ultimately, when you get to decisions which are compromise decisions, those decisions tend to hold quite firm because everybody's had to give something. If everybody gives something and everybody feels like they've been fairly treated in the end, those are the kind of agreements, if you like, that tend to hold firm. And that's not just in football. If you look at members associations in other industries as well, my wife actually works in a similar association, but in the mobile telecoms industry. The dynamics are exactly the same. You have big guys, medium guys, small guys, in terms of operators. You're always trying to work collective agreements. And when you get those collective agreements and everybody stands behind them, you've got something quite strong. When you've got individual interests that are always trying to kind of get above the rest, it's difficult to keep it together.
And what would you say then were the main milestones of the ECA since its inception?
Well, the work done in the first 10 years before I joined, the work done way before I joined by the first chairman, Kalle Rummenigge, and the general secretary, Michele Centenaro. Those guys basically led the thing for the first 10 years and achieved some, really important milestones on behalf of clubs, particularly when it came to the relationship between clubs and national teams. So it really improved.
Like releasing players,
protecting players. Things like insurance programs that never existed before. So when players would go on national team duty and get injured and come back, it was all
right.
the risk and the liability was all on the clubs. The clubs pay the players' salaries. The national teams don't pay the players' salaries. And so, of course, all clubs and all players want to play and support national team football. It's a vital part of the ecosystem. But the rules were not in favour of clubs back when ECA started. They weren't really balanced and fair. So that's a lot of what ECA has been able to achieve in that first decade. And also making sure that it was positioned for the kind of decision making that's been taking place over the last 2 to 3 years and will continue, is our expectation and hope over the next decade, because we want to be kind of much more equal partners with the governing bodies, who are much bigger in terms of scale and scope, and they've had much bigger history of in football than we have as an institution. But ultimately, as the representative of the clubs, and with the importance of the clubs in the whole driving of football, we hope to be in a position now where we can do more, proper partnering, proper joint venturing, proper co-management of club interests with the governing bodies, with the competition organisers. And we wouldn't be in a position to do that. We wouldn't be in a position to actually, for me to come in and try and start to build the infrastructure that we need to be able to do that, unless it was for that first 10 years of groundwork on the more sort of, if you like, political, arena.
Cool. Listen, before we go, I have one more question maybe about the ECA. There was an important week. It was an important week for you guys. So wanted to maybe learn a bit more about the announcements that were made. And then we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about your work and your learnings. But before I do that, let me just shout out to some people that left some messages here. And I have the feeling that there will be some questions coming in the second part. So Taras is another one watching us in Ukraine. We have Alexandre in Portugal. Here is, this is Amanda. Hi, Amanda. You need to register on LinkedIn so I can hear your name, read your name. This is Regina in Barra Bonita. Alex as well, saying it was an amazing journey. Otacílio as well in Brazil. Melissa in Portugal. And there's someone from Lithuania here. I can see that on LinkedIn. Jolanta, watching in Lithuania. There's a few more, but I'll get to that later. Oh, and there's Attila watching in Belo Horizonte, Brazil. Now, it's an international crowd.
It's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Yeah, great. Hello to you all.
And they will be sending questions shortly, I suppose. Anyway, so let's talk about the main decisions that was taken this year. So I see that ECA endorsed the UEFA's new club competition calendar for after 2024. Could you maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, more than just the calendar. It's really the whole, as we say, the format and the access of the competitions, which really is technical speak for the whole design of the competitions. How the competitions work from a sporting perspective, and what teams play in them, and what's the structure of the competitions. It's one of the key pillars of the framework of European football that we care so much about as ECA, and that we work on a daily basis with, particularly UEFA on as the governing body, but also FIFA. Earlier this year, before I get to what we call post 2024, because we're talking about the European men's club competitions from post 2024, which is one small part actually of a bigger program of change, of reform that we've been doing, that covers, of course, the women's game, but also covers things like the financial regulation and how the game is sort of regulated, how the clubs are regulated and licensed by the competition organisers from a financial point of view. And that's been a big piece of work that was about 4 to 6 weeks ago. Many people on this call, I'm sure, would have read about the newly called financial sustainability rules, used to be called financial fair play, or FFP. Yeah. So that was the first, if you like, pillar that really, between the football stakeholders, we all kind of got through and got approved. But it's not really as sexy as the competition. So I think the announcement this week, and the reason I was in Vienna after our executive board meeting in Madrid on Monday, it was the UEFA Executive Committee meeting on Tuesday in Vienna, and then the UEFA Congress. UEFA and its ultimate decision-making body, which is the Executive Committee, is the one that makes the final decisions on all kind of aspects of the sporting side of the competitions, but with a lot of input from all the stakeholders, and in particularly from ECA, because we represent the clubs that play in the competitions. And really, you've got those clubs, you've got the competition organizer, UEFA, you bring them together, and you've got the best sporting competitions in the world. So it's a huge privilege, as I said earlier, to be able to work where I do. And the partnership with the clubs has been very strong with the members in reaching this decision. The partnership with UEFA has been excellent. Over the past year, that partnership has really deepened, and they're a really enjoyable and professional bunch to work with. These things aren't easy, right? They're really decisions which everybody cares so deeply about, because they are of such importance to European club football. When you talk about changing something like the Champions League, although it's not just about the Champions League, the decisions this week were about the Europa League and the Conference League as well, the three senior men's competitions. But when you talk about changes to those, everybody listens and everybody wants to have their say. So what was approved this week was something that we will all get very, very excited about the more we start to learn about it on a broader sphere. But as of 2024, there'll be a fundamental change in how these competitions are played. And the best way of describing the biggest change is that what everybody knows right now is the group stage. So that period between September and December, as it is right now, where all the teams are put into groups of 4, and they all play these home and away matches, and then the top 2 in each group goes through to the knockouts. That's going to change completely. That's actually going to be done away with. And we are going to be moving to what I think will be called something like a league phase. We'll let the marketing people get involved in giving it a final name, but it will be a league structure. So for the first time ever in a European competition context, all of the teams will be put together in one league table. It will look like a league table that all fans of football are more used to from their domestic environments. And so you will see for the first time all of these teams from across all of the different European countries, big, medium and small, all next to each other in the same league table, all fighting for their positions within the league table. And that will be something that takes place between September and January every year. So there'll be a couple of games after Christmas into January, which will kind of keep that, if you like, that excitement, that narrative going for longer. And then after that league phase is finished, there'll be 8 games in the Champions League in that phase. I'll tell you in a minute how we play 8 games in a fair way, because obviously all teams aren't going to play each other. There'll be 8 games in the Europa League and there'll be 6 games in the Conference League. After that, there'll be a new round, which will be a playoff to get to the knockout phases. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take in that league table it'll be 36 teams, another change, it'll move from 32 to 36. We're going to take teams ranked between 9 and 24, and they will all play a playoff. And so 8 of those 16 teams will go into the knockouts, where they will join the top 8 in the league table. So all the way through that league phase, it's going to matter where you come. There's going to be huge competitivity, if that's a word. Competition probably is the right word, to get in that top 24, and where you come is going to matter, because it'll define how you've progressed through the competition. And that's what we really care about, is relevant games. Every game, as much as possible, we want to make relevant, exciting, passionate for the players, for the fans, for the clubs, for the competition. We want to do as much as we can to avoid these so-called dead rubbers, which don't happen very often, but they do happen. They have a tendency to happen, particularly in the group stage, where some of the groups are kind of over by match day 4. This new league concept will keep it all going as long and deep into the season as possible. It's a hugely exciting. It's not to say that the current system is broken, right? The current system is great. I mean, just look at what's what's been happening these past few weeks in all three competitions. I don't think I've seen anything like it, and we could not have hoped for a better start to the Conference League, this third competition which UEFA introduced, which got a lot of skepticism at the time it was announced, but has delivered beyond anyone's expectations. So we've got a great set of competitions now, but we think we can make them even better. And that was really what this week was about. It was also about, and I think this is important, it was also about getting not just the clubs and UEFA to sort of agree on something in abstract, but it was also about, especially since what happened last year happened, and everybody has made the effort in a big way to work closer together. It's about understanding, what's right and what's wrong for the fans in particular, for the leagues, for the players, and can we actually get something together, which is, it's not going to please everybody. We know that's a sort of nirvana that's probably undeliverable, but at least it will please most people most of the time. And so a lot of this week has also been, I think, a very positive experience, because it's probably certainly in my short time here, it's the decision which has had the most good feeling, positive feeling, the most support from the widest number of people. And we still think it's a very progressive decision, and it really advances the kind of things we want to advance in giving clubs more opportunities to play European football. Yeah. But it's been a good week. It's been a good week so far.
Great. Before we move to the other topic, because I was sure that there was going to be a question about it, and I just want to have a quick follow-up. It's a simple one. So Ella Jones asks, so why will this strategy be more beneficial than the group stage? In fact, I want to actually sort of rephrase that in a sense that, because you said, right, the Champions League, for instance, or other competitions, they look great, but obviously you're trying to improve it. So the question is, what is it that you want to, maybe, I don't want to say fix, but actually make better? So for the clubs, for the stakeholders, where do you think that change actually will improve European football in its essence, maybe? And then maybe you can tell me what are the biggest challenge that you may expect, changing something that it's so loved by many. So those are two questions. What is it that you want to improve, and what is the main challenge that you foresee?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that the group stage is universally loved by many. If I'm honest, I mean, everybody will have their own views, and I'd be interested maybe even in the views of everybody on this call. But as you said, there's nothing broken with it, but it does have a tendency to, in certain groups, it's very random. Because of the draw, I mean, and the draws are seeded, etc. But sometimes you'll have a group of death. Sometimes you'll have a group which is very polarized from the start, because after match day 3, it's obvious who's going to win. There's that sort of competitive imbalance that can come both within a group and across the different groups, which we think can be improved. We think that can be fixed and improved by this league phase. The other thing is within the group stage, groups of 4 playing home and away, the clubs get 6 European games. And for the vast majority of our members, if not actually all of our members, there's room to play more European football. Some would like to play lots more European football, and some would like to play a bit more European football, but everyone would like to play more European football.
Right.
So we think that there are formats around, like this league phase, that allows more European football to be played. I think that what that league phase will then deliver is much more exciting, as I said, much more exciting and relevant games. It'll be interesting, much deeper into the competition, because it will matter where you finish. Even if it's clear you're going to finish in the top 24, so you're going to go through, it'll be clear early. People will still fight. Clubs will still fight, believe me. They will fight for positions in that league table. They'll fight over their local rivals. They'll fight over their international rivals. And we will make sure that your final position does count when it comes to where you go next, what actually that means to you. So where you're seeded, where you're placed in the draw. The other very intriguing thing, and this maybe is a bit more of to your second question, what might take a bit of getting used to, because this is really innovative.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get away from the old concept of home and away, so 2 legs over home and away, but only in this first phase. To be very clear, because people get very concerned about it, the home and away 2 legs will stay in the knockout phase. You know,
Right.
when you're talking knockout football, then that home and away thing is crucial, because it gives the balance and it gives fans in home and away, you know, those stories that are amazing. In the league phase, however, these 8 games, they'll be either home or away. So clubs will play 4 games at home and 4 games away, but there'll be different opponents.
Yes.
And every club will have a different fixture list, because you can't, in a 36-team league, you can't play 35 games, right? There's not enough space, clearly.
Yeah.
So what this has to be is a system which is based on seeding. It's actually a system which is used in other games, in other sports. It's known as the Swiss system colloquially, although that will never be how it's referred to when it kicks off. But I think it's referred to that because a Swiss guy dreamt it up because it was a way of playing chess tournaments. Right. That's one for the statisticians and the historians. But what it does is, in a fair way, it gives each team a balanced set of opponents based on seeding. And so I'm going to play 8 games against my 8 opponents. You're going to play 8 games against your opponents. It's going to be a fair sporting balance between us, because we've played the similar levels of opponents, and we will get points, right, as we would in a league table. And for our fans, it'll be a different European journey every time you're in the competition. So if you're a passionate, I mean, I won't tell you my team, but I'm a passionate fan, and I remember the European journeys that my team has been on, my club has been on. And I remember those kind of home and aways, and they were great. But I can also get really excited about every year, you know, wishing that they qualify every year. It's going to be a different journey. I'm going to see 4 different clubs at home and 4 different clubs away. And that starts to rewrite the kind of history of how the clubs progress through these competitions in a new way. So that's dead exciting. But I also think, to your question, that's going to take some getting used to for some.
There's plenty of time to communicate that. It kicks off when? Which season?
Yeah, this is important. 2024. So we have a couple of years. At times like these, when decisions are made, particularly within football, there's a lot of media, there's a lot of coverage, there's a lot of questions, particularly from people within the industry, and that's all important stuff. But there's a difference between communicating, you know, the institutional side of a new competition versus actually communicating the sporting and global, you know, excitement that the competition is going to deliver. So we do have some time. It's not a lot of time. 2 years is not a lot of time. We have some great competitions that are still going to run until then, by the way. And let's not forget that we have another 2 cycles of what's already, as you said, a fantastic competition format. And we don't want to get in the way of that. We don't want to start talking about the brilliant stuff, you know, that's coming and sort of forget that we've actually got some really good stuff now. And it's very important for commercial partners, you know, who are the, you know, who really provide our ability to carry on doing what we're doing. You know, we want to make sure that they continue to get excited by the competitions and the fans get excited by them, which they will for the next 2 years. However, in parallel, we have some time to really make sure everybody understands exactly what this new post-2024 format will look like. And we're getting to work on that immediately.
That's great. Charlie, just for me to want to be respectful of your time, but this really flew by. We kind of have 55 minutes already. So I talked to you about an hour, so I don't know if you can stay a couple of minutes more, because I wanted to ask you, go back to your career. So we talked about, you know, the role of ECA and all that, you know, how it fits the whole structure of the European football. But I'm interested now in knowing, you know, what you, Charlie, as CEO of ECA, and then what's your role, for instance, do you have any participation in the decision making of those those decisions? Are you there to support the board mainly? And what is it that you like the most about your job?
3 very good questions. And more than happy to stay for a little bit longer, but probably not for the half an hour longer it would take me to answer all of those in detail. But I mean,
no, quickly.
yeah. Look, I'm an enabler, right? I run the ECA. We call it the administration. It sounds a bit old-fashioned, but that's what we call it. The management, if you like. Our chairman calls us the management. And so we are, and I lead this team, which, as I said earlier, is sort of 22, 23 people of, incredibly talented, passionate, diverse people. Also, I'm really pleased to say, very young, much younger than me. I'm the oldest person here by, I think, some way. Maybe there's one other person hiding somewhere, but we're a very young team, and that gives us a lot of energy and a lot of passion, and it's really an exciting and a valuable part of what I do, a rewarding part of what I do, to be able to bring new talent in and to give them opportunities and to see them develop. There's nothing better than seeing talent and the people that work with you achieve things that that they want to, or that surprises them that they have the ability to achieve. So that's the management. And we're the enabler, right? So we enable our members, ultimately our 246 members, to make decisions. Now, 246 members can't all make decisions at once. So there is a board. They all elect an executive board. So once every 4 years, we have a general assembly where everybody has a vote and they elect their representatives. And it's that 24-person at the moment executive board that makes the decisions. There are lots of working groups which we put together with the clubs on different topics. Like we have a finance working group and a commercial working group and a youth working group, and we have bodies looking at women's football and youth football. So all of those feed into the board and help make decisions, and we kind of enable all of that. We are not the management team is not the decision makers. We are the enablers of the decisions which are taken by our ultimately by our members, by our general assembly.
And of all that, do you have like a favorite part of your job?
Oof. It's really there's a lot of stuff that goes on all at once. The brain is never given a day off or even a minute off. So from an intellectual stimulation point of view, it's sort of off the charts, I would say. It's the people I work with, both here in the management team, but also in the clubs. Being with clubs, big clubs, medium clubs, small clubs, all different shapes and sizes, all different environments, everyone with different challenges. But ultimately, it's about football. Ultimately, it's about those 90 minutes on the pitch in all sorts of different environments, and I think it's those times where I'm sitting watching football that I often take. That's my time to take a bit of a breath, and that's when I sort of reflect on how fortunate I am really, and how privileged I am to work here.
And then what would you say is since you like watching football so much, of course, as probably all of us watching here do, what then is your favorite sporting moment? Maybe you can skip the part of your club winning a league title because you don't want to reveal your team, but maybe another one.
Maybe I can reveal a little bit. My favorite sporting moment. Well, can I give you a football one and a non-football one?
Of course.
Okay, my favorite.
You're the guest. You can give as many as you want.
Chelsea winning the semi-final of the Champions League away at Barcelona in 2012. Hands down from a football perspective. So that's given you also my team. From a sporting perspective, Tiger winning the Masters,
right?
A couple of years ago. Tiger Woods winning the Masters a couple of years ago. For me, there's been a lot of comebacks of note, particularly in football. But for me, that was the most incredible sporting comeback of all time, and it was just astonishing to watch.
Very good, very good. Just so you know, David Fowler says it's a great session. Thank you, David. So if anybody...
Cheers, David. Thanks for listening from the airport lounge.
And if I forgot to ask if everybody else is enjoying it, if you can hit that like button. We talked about algorithms before, and that helps. I have one more before we go. Right, we talked about, or alluded to that in the beginning, but I wanted to ask you about the importance of the formal education, and I'm talking about as well. There's now, well, you said that studying or working with consultancy, management consulting was super important to bring that knowledge into sports. And since years now, there's a number of programs that try to do exactly that, focus in sport. I did one, the FIFA Master, as my colleague that worked with you, Didrik. We were classmates actually, but I actually work with many others, the Johan Cruyff, the STS, and Liverpool, and so many others. What is then the importance of that type of a formal education in sports today? Thinking you as someone that's hires people constantly.
Yeah, I think that those education courses that are done from within sport by the sports institutions, of which we do one, by the way, which is we call the club management program. You mentioned the FIFA Masters. UEFA has an academy and does a number of different programs. They're hugely important. They're really, really important, and they're becoming ever better from an education point of view. And there are some really passionate people working, yourself, for example, and others working in pulling these programs together, both from an organizational side and also from a participation side. And I am just one of them, the people that try to participate as much as I can in these things. But I also think that at the core, when you have a sort of an education initiative run in the industry for the industry, it has a tendency to be a little bit insular, a little bit self-referential. What do I mean by that? I mean that it's as much about getting to know people and networking and that kind of valuable stuff of knowing your way around the industry as it is about education or hardcore business training. Yeah. I haven't seen in sports anywhere yet. I may be missing something, and I'm delighted if I am. But I haven't seen anything in sport which I would compare to the kind of training I got when I was in management consultancy in my early 20s, which I talked about earlier. And this is crucial. This, I think, is a big thing we are missing. And I sort of would. I'm glad you came back to this subject, because I would, encourage and call on everybody working in and around off the pitch talent in football and professional talent in sport to do better, not necessarily at trying to replicate these things, because I don't think turning sports institutions into management consultancies is the answer. It's not. We have there's all sorts of reasons why that would be bad, but probably by building better bridges between sport and other industries. I don't think the bridges are good enough. I don't think that the exchange of talent, both ways, by the way, because sports professionals have a lot to deliver to more, traditional industries, if I can sort of use that word. But those bridges aren't there. I think there's too much of this kind of either you work in sport or you don't. Right. And recruiting people from outside is very difficult. Back to the question earlier, how do you make sure that you don't disregard a square CV and you really understand what people's potential is? Adapting our own cultures, our own structures within sports companies to make sure that we can bring these people in, give them, a good welcome, a good home, and quite quickly get them integrated into the way we do things, but also learn from them and adapt the way we do things. We're often not very adaptable in terms of our cultural way of working in sport. So this is the blend of the two. Some in-industry training and programs is great, and I'm really pleased to see across the piece everybody is getting better at that. But this element of real professional training would help such a great deal, and I just think it's something that it's a gap.
That's great, Charlie. Just before you go, because we have Ella watching here the whole thing, and she has one more question here asking about if there are internship opportunities at ECA. if you take interns, how do I mean, if you have young professionals that would like to work with European football with you guys, do you have an internship program or thinking of having one?
We are. Thank you for the question, and I've obviously done a good job in marketing the place. We absolutely do. I think working with interns and giving interns opportunity is a fantastic route for not just sport, but for any business. We don't have a structured program. I think that's something we need to think about, not just us, but probably I think there's a great opportunity to have a sort of graduate trainee program across a number of different sports environments. You know, imagine coming just within football and spending a bit of time in a club, a bit of time in a league, a bit of time in a federation, a bit of time in a marketing agency. You know, that would be some program. But at the moment we do it a little bit more informally. So Ella, just send in your CV to us and we can have a chat for sure. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That's the purpose of internships, is a little bit of, you know, both a person and an employer getting to know each other a little bit. So we've had we've had successes and we've had not so successes. But I mean, one recent one who I'm absolutely delighted about is we've just recruited on a full-time basis someone to work in our communications department. She is an incredible talent, an incredible young talent called Jennifer, and she came to us via an internship. Right. So it was a little bit, you know, like that. And you know,
I was in touch with her prior to the interview. So Jennifer, thanks for helping us set this up.
Yeah, that's, but yeah, Jennifer, if you're watching, it was a very honest and off the cuff comment, but it was just designed to show that that's a really good way, I think, particularly at, you know, entry level talent, young talent, bringing people in and making sure that they understand the decisions that they're making before they make them.
I 100% agree. Charlie, I want to thank you so much. Before we go, I always ask people if they want to recommend a book, or if not, a podcast or a YouTube video or something, you know, for our audience here that are, you know, young professionals wanting to develop in the sport industry. It doesn't have to be about sport, but do you have any book that you would like to recommend?
Oh my goodness. And it doesn't have to be about sport. I have to say, I do listen to a lot of podcasts about football, but I try to, and I read a lot of media, so I try to avoid at the moment reading too many kind of books about football. I'm a bit of a, very strangely, I'm a bit of a kind of a history buff, so I tend to read about ancient and medieval history, and I don't think anyone wants to hear about that. There's a ton of great podcasts out there. Some are frivolous, some are serious. I think my go-to ones.
What is the one that you've been listening more regularly then?
Yeah, I think it's somewhere between the athletics podcast, when they do the more sort of business aspects of football, and the one that is that Rob Harris, Tariq Panja, and Martin Ziegler do. I think it's called Sport Unlocked. Okay. And it's, you know, they're three kind of pretty well-known football journalists, and they get together, and I think every Friday night or Saturday morning, and it often sounds like they're just having a chat with each other in the pub, but they're quite intelligent and challenging, a bunch of guys, and it's always interesting to try and listen to that every weekend.
Oh, that sounds good. We'll check it out. Listen, again, thank you so much. I hope to, you know, sometime get to Nyon and have a chat with you in person. Send my regards to, you know, the teammates at ECA. You have a wonderful team there. I know, as you know, many of them, and have been following, you know, the trajectory for a long time. Respect a lot of, I mean, what you guys been doing. So yeah, thank you so much. And to the audience, I want to remind them that if they want to go to that job fair in Lausanne next week, next Friday, there's a link in the description. They can check it out and register there. And I think this is it for me. So there won't be a live episode next week because we'll be fully involved about that. And then we'll have another one probably the week after. Charlie, anything else that you would like to say before we go?
Just keep up the good work, João. And thanks everyone for attending. Wish you all the very best.
Cheers. Just stay there. I'll finish this and I'll get back to you. 1 second. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.